Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Today's episode is an interview style episode. I'd say more it's like a partner episode because I asked a previous guest, actually she is a thrice appearing guest on the podcast. I asked her to come on and talk with me on a particular topic, and that topic is accepting versus fixing our children. And we'll obviously talk more about what the distinction is between the two, but they have very different energies, and one feels very heavy and one feels very light. Neither one is easy. And so I think it's a really, really rich topic and one for us moms to reflect on and how we're showing up for ourselves and for our children. So let me tell you a little bit more about Carrie. So as I mentioned, she's a previous guest of the podcast. She first appeared in July 2022 on episode 98 called Tending to Your Soul with Carrie Holt. And then her second appearance actually, so maybe she's a 4-time guest because there was a 2-part episode. The first one being Carrying the Heavy Emotional Load of Special Needs Nursing Care with Carrie Holt and Casey Craig. So I had these 2 amazing women come on and do this episode with me. And those episodes appeared November 8th and 15th of 2023, episodes number 171 and 172. So all worth checking out, particularly if nursing care is a part of your life or in-home care of any kind. These ladies have amazing expertise, and it was really a well appreciated episode by many. All right, well, let me tell you more about who Carrie is. Speaker, author, podcaster, caregiver with nearly 2 decades of experience raising a child with complex medical needs. She's a podcast host of This Unexpected Life. She shares stories of resilience, faith, and finding God's presence in the midst of suffering. She's the co-author of The Other Side of Special and has been featured on Focus on the Family, Moody Radio, Family Life Radio, and other notable platforms. With honesty and hope, she encourages women to trust God when life doesn't turn out as expected. So a little bit about her son. He's officially an adult. I should say her son with disabilities. He's officially an adult, 18 years old. He was prenatally diagnosed with spina bifida and hydrocephalus. He's had 2 life-saving surgeries the first week of his life, and then they left the hospital thinking all was well-ish. 2 weeks later, he went into respiratory failure, back into the hospital where they spent the next month fighting for his life. 64 days after admittance, they brought him home, and they brought home a medically fragile baby with a trach, ventilator, feeding tube, and 24/7 nursing care in her home. Currently, he's had 66 surgeries and overcome so much. And so now I know you will love Carrie. She has just shown up extraordinarily in so many different ways in her life. And as I suspected, having her voice as part of this conversation, part of this topic, was richer than I could have done myself. And it's funny because I actually had it on my mind for years to talk about this. And it wasn't until it clicked that it wasn't supposed to be a solo episode. And so I trusted my gut, invited Carrie on, and we're talking about this aspect of fixing versus accepting. And this is something I see come up pretty regularly, particularly when I talk about what I call the evolution of a special needs mom. Now, this is not a linear progress or progression. This is just ways of identifying parts of the experience that we have. It's more of a messy circle than it is a line. But, where we start with what I call stunned survival. And it is what it says. It's like we're surviving, we're stunned, we're learning new language. We are just kind of figuring out what is up and what is down after we have a diagnosis or event. Then we move into the stage where I call stabilized yet self-sacrificing. And this is the stage where the fixing energy is strong, my friend. Just like the force is strong in you, the fixing energy is strong. And we give it all. We got the mama bear energy. We start to lose who we are often in this stage because we are up against what feels like two terrible choices. And so moms usually choose their young, and they choose to show up in all the ways for their children and in none of the ways for themselves, which then lands us to what I call the next stage, which is alone and afraid. And so this is where we hit up against our own limits. What we used to do, that big, brilliant mind of ours, is not able to solve this problem. And we're like, what do we do now? This is very hopeless. I feel very alone. I feel afraid because everything I know to do is not working, and we can't have it go on like this. That opens up the door to the next stage, which I call the restoration, otherwise known as calming the chaos. This is where we start to engage with who we are. We restore our identity. We shift from I can't to how can I? Very fundamental shift. And then ultimately we move into the last stage, which I call power, peace, and possibility. And I know it sounds lofty. And remember, this is not we don't live here forever once we arrive, but it is learning a new way of being that has us show up differently as moms and as women. So I ran through that really fast, but that's the reason why this conversation is so important, is because this fixing and accepting conversation is so common, and it's one that will have us feel very, very stuck. So let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast, Carrie. I'm so glad you're here for not the first time, not the second time, but the third time.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I feel very honored.
I'm a big fan of Carrie, and actually that's what led us to this particular conversation today. Is I was listening to your podcast, This Unexpected Life. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Get it exactly right.
Yes.
I almost said but no, it's This Unexpected Life, available where all podcasts are available. And I was listening to an episode where you weren't talking about this specifically, but you shared this aspect of this navigation of fixing, or even I loved your language about it, the temptation to try to fix versus acceptance. And I think this is one of those topics that, if there was a book to read to figure out how to be the most incredible special needs mom, this would be like a handful of chapters. So I asked you to come on to talk about this specifically. And a little backstory is, so on my wall here in the office, I have a bunch of Post-it notes of episode ideas, and I kind of map them out. And I've had this Post-it, fixing versus accepting, on for, I don't know, maybe a year. And it just never had found the right time. And I heard you talk about this, and I was like, oh, it's because it wasn't meant to be a solo episode. It was meant to be in conjunction with you and our shared experience. So thank you for accepting my invitation.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so before we get into the episode, for those who haven't gone back and gotten an experience of who you are, let's share a little bit about a snapshot, just what your life looks like today, a little bit about where you've come from, but why don't you share a little bit about who you are with our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Carrie Holt, and I live in Central Ohio. Been married to my husband 25 years, which is really cool. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary a couple months ago. And I have 4 kids, and we're in that half empty nest stage where I have my 2 oldest sons are in college. And then I have another son who is 18, Toby, who has disabilities and has been medically fragile, and we've had a lot of surgeries. And then my youngest is a girl, and she's 15, and she's a sophomore in high school. So we're just kind of in this stage of life is calm sometimes. And then I feel like the last few months, we have just had a lot of doctor's appointments, a lot of things that have just come up. I always feel like it's feast or famine. Like we'll have months where we have nothing and things are going really well. And then we have months where I can feel the stress in my chest because we are running nonstop back and forth to the hospital and coordinating surgeries and all of that. So,
Yeah, in that we were talking a little bit before the episode, and that surgery coordination piece, that work is no joke.
It's not. Yes.
that is intense, I think is a little indescribable. Okay, well, thank you. And another thing I wanted to put in before we kind of get into the meat of the conversation is that when we're talking about this topic, fixing versus accepting, it's a conversation that has nothing to do with our children per se. Yes, it's around our experiences as we show up as mothers for them. But I think it's so important to acknowledge that fundamentally, I don't believe that our children need to be fixed, ever needed to be fixed. It's really a conversation about how we serve our children and the triggers that get triggered in us as parents as we navigate these undeterminable paths for our children. And while, of course, we will pull from our personal experiences, we have a commitment to protect the honor and dignity of our children. So not pulling their whole story and putting it on display will be our intention. So if we talk in vagaries or not abundantly clear about exactly what it looks like for our own personal lives, that's the reason why. Is there anything you would add to that, Carrie?
No, it's just as you were saying that, I was thinking about a lot of the fixing has had to do with my own personal insecurities.
Oh, yeah. I got the chills when you said that.
Yeah. Yes. So, this is the journey of us as moms not finding our identity in our children, how well we think they're doing or how far behind we think they are.
Oh, very well said. The pitch that I had to you was to talk about this temptation to fix versus accept our children the way they are. And also the complexity of answering that question of how do you help your child reach their full potential? And I loved, this is the language that you used, reach their full potential, because I think it takes the emphasis of the value that we get from productivity and what we achieve, but really centers a conversation around what full potential looks like for that child. And I really liked the language that you used about that. So that's kind of where we're going. And so we're going to start with talking about the energy of fixing, particularly fixing versus accepting. And I think there's questions that come up all the time. Where do we draw the line as mothers of these children? How much therapy do we do? How hard do we push them academically? And I want to talk about, what do you experience in this fixing energy when you think about it?
So I think there's a tension there, of course, because there is that desire. I do think that we do have some God-given mom instincts around, I think this is the potential that my child can reach. Maybe it's speaking or eating by mouth or whatever those things might look like for your child. I have this belief in them that they're going to reach this, and this is their full potential. But I can say personally that I've always been a fixer. And not just, and I have 4 kids, not just and then I homeschooled and still homeschool. But I began to realize as a mom that my desire to fix is really about a brokenness inside of me that I have a hard time with things being undone, with things looking not perfect, with, and you could ask my husband for years, that doesn't go over so well, just always pointing out, this is where you can improve. And I think largely it's because I have just always been trying to fix myself too. And it just comes out when you have a child with disabilities, all of a sudden it's just a little bit more obvious. All of these ways that we want them to be normal, or maybe to even be less judged by the world and more accepted. But there's a lot of striving. There's a lot of non-rest in that.
Ooh, that's a really, really great description, non-rest. And I think hearing your reflection of it's about a brokenness inside of you, I think it makes me think of the enoughness of who we are.
Yeah.
And like, period. And often we don't experience being enough. So again, kind of back to where I fundamentally believe that we are enough, period. And yet also most of us have a strive. We have an unrest about that being the question. We question if we are enough. And there was something else that you mentioned I wanted to talk about, or even just kind of speak to this reflection. Our children, whether right or wrong, we often believe that they are a reflection of who we are, that we will be judged by how they show up. And I think that when I think about this fixing energy, I think about how it is for me, and I think a lot of others, driven by fear. It's this fear of, my kid has to learn independence or else they will live with me forever. And so like this fear of the future, if I don't, or if they don't, then. So there's like this formula we live by, and it's all this fear. And if you think about what fear does, is it constricts, it closes, it's rigid, and not often very enjoyable to experience. And so if we think about being in this space and then showing up for our children, you can just see how that's going to get a little wonky, or a lot wonky, real fast. And ultimately, I think it's like when the worst of me comes out, when I don't show up with the compassion and the grace and the patience that I would like to have.
Yeah.
I think another thing about the fixing is that a lot of it, I think, like, we're inside of the automatic. So, you talked about like you started by, this is a brokenness inside of you that is appearing. And so I think about this fixing, and it's almost like the first thing that comes to the party when we are thrown into the deep end, if you will, and navigating all these challenges that we just probably didn't have the skills yet to handle. I feel like it's kind of the automatic that jumps in, like the solution that we think is going to solve everything is this fixing energy. And I think another trap of that is that there's a never endingness to the fixing, which then opens up a real big door to the guilt party, because there's often not enough time to do all the things that we think we have to, or that we should be doing. And have you experienced guilt that you think is associated to the fixing aspects?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can just think of, like, the word that kept coming to mind too is control.
Yeah.
Like, when we're fearful, we want to control. And of course, when the initial diagnosis happens, immediately it's just, okay, what can I control? What can I grasp? And then when those things slip through our fingers, maybe it's that our child doesn't speak with verbal words, and all of a sudden, then there's guilt. Like, I didn't do enough, or we didn't find the right therapist, or we didn't find the right method, or whatever it is. It's just this striving all the time to make this better. And I can remember just one time in our journey where I actually had a doctor just kind of look at me and say, because of this going on medically, you need to let this dream go. And I thought, okay. And it was almost like he gave me permission. It was an outside voice that gave me permission that this just wasn't possible anymore. And then when I knew it wasn't possible, the guilt kind of just dissipated. And I was willing to accept, but there was also grief in that.
Yes. And we are going to talk about that aspect of, the acceptance. Yeah. And it's so interesting because I'm thinking about a story is coming to my mind about, so this is so many years ago. This is when Levi was probably about 3. And so after his first surgery, when he was 2, it wasn't abundantly clear what was happening with his vision, but what was clear is that the ophthalmologist had asked us to patch his sighted eye, or what was known to be his sighted eye, not his compromised eye, for 4 hours a day. Now, that was hard with all of the other things. I had a newborn, and et cetera, et cetera. And actually, my dad even sponsored a caregiver to come in and be his one-on-one to do that work, because otherwise it just wouldn't have been possible. So we were pretty diligent on doing this for about a year. And there's so many parts where I remember, Levi saying something and me thinking, oh my gosh, he's seeing. It's working, And what I didn't know is that he has no light detection in his non-sighted eye. And so that by patching him for 4 hours a day, we were actually blinding him completely for 4 hours a day. And I think about this, and this is an instance actually where I can look back and I was like, I actually wasn't in the fixing energy. I was actually just like, okay, like this is what we need to do to restore his sight. And we did that. And we came to that crossroads conversation with the doctor where essentially we came and reported back what we thought. And I remember the doctor like visibly was shaken, grieved. He literally turned to us and said, you know what? Well, at least we know we did everything we could. Because if we had any chance of restoring any sight, we would have. And so I bring this story up, not to actually talk about fixing, but to talk about the almost imperceptible difference between fixing and doing the hard work of special needs mothering.
Yeah.
And that this conversation will require you to reflect on the nuance of what you're bringing. And I want to kind of put in a little like cautionary note here is that our invitation is that if you find that you are doing more fixing than what I'll call serving, the invitation is to compassion, to self-compassion, to have it be an opportunity to ask yourself, what do I need? Given what's happening, what do I need? So that's a little segue, but I think important because I think part of the challenge here is it's so hard to tell what is coming from like this fear-based fixing that we're talking about and what is coming from perhaps acceptance. So anything else on the fixing aspect, Carrie, before we turn to look a little bit at acceptance and what that looks like?
Well, I can just say that I feel like just further down the road that it's funny that we're having this conversation today because the irony is not lost on me that this is something that I have felt like has come up in my own, just like my conviction spiritually lately, because I have realized lately that the only conversations that I'm having with my son, who is verbal, and we can have these conversations, has been about everything he's doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it just hit me like last week or 2 weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast. It was actually about husbands and how I just realized that, he needs my affirmation. He needs me to be his biggest cheerleader. The likelihood of him getting married and having a wife and having someone to cheer him on is maybe lower than the average person. And if all he's hearing from me is boo, boo, like you don't do this right, you don't do this well, then that's not good. And it's not going to help him. And so I've just been intentionally trying to, like you said, look at him with compassion and realize, it's hard when your kids can verbally speak because you have a hard time differentiating between what they can control and what they can't when it comes to their behaviors. But then I also look at the history and all the brain surgeries my son has had. And again, I feel like this tension between fixing and helping them reach their full potential, it doesn't go away, really. For the most part, I mean, maybe there are some exceptions to this, but their entire life. But just what was my focus? And my focus needs to be affirming his progress, even if that is the tiniest baby step that he's making a choice, his words, whatever it is, that it's not my job to fix him.
That is such an important part of this. I think my husband and I have had the same conviction, and we'll kind of pause for a second and kind of like check ourselves and be like, think about the sum of what Levi is experiencing. Levi, don't do this. Levi, stop chewing ice. Levi, like, and even just like the tone of how we show up. Because yes, there are a lot of things that need correction, coaching, parental involvement.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times they are really frustrating. And yet, I think that it's the internal shift that we can have that approaches them with what you said is affirmation. And I think that's where this acceptance will lead us in, instead of having essentially us relate to them as the problem, we relate to them as like more like just a full human.
Yeah.
And somebody that has a need. And it just totally changes the way that we relate to them. But again, this is an internal work.
Yeah.
This is like where we, they aren't very likely in many cases going to change how they're doing things. At this point, my son's 16, your son is over 18.
Yeah.
And so I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I think, for a large portion of things, we are where we are. By no means are we done growing and developing, but there are certain parts where I'm like, okay, this is what our reality is. So let's let that move us into this conversation about acceptance. Now, I think if my memory serves me, I've probably done full episodes on acceptance, so we can go back and cite those in the show notes. But acceptance is this really tricky thing because I find that most people confuse acceptance with approval. And actually, I have a good friend who is going through a divorce right now. It is not a divorce of her choosing. And she's kind of like, how do I accept this when I'm like, this is not okay? And I'm like, oh, there you go. Acceptance is different than approval.
Yeah.
And so I think I wanted to put that in there and orient us to the actual simplicity of acceptance. And I did the honors of looking up a Webster Dictionary definition. And so the definition is actually accept. Acceptance is a whole nother verb concept, which I'm sure you could tell. Or not. Verb, what is it? What is it? Is that a noun? I don't know what it is.
I think it's a noun. I think.
Yeah, because it would be the act of doing accept.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know. This was not my area of expertise. Ask me anything about plants. I'm got you there. Okay. The official Webster definition of the word accept: believe or come to recognize an opinion, explanation, etc., as valid or correct. And I think how I would translate that to how I experience acceptance or to accept is to accept something as truth, to let something be true. And what would you add or kind of share in terms of how you've struggled with the concept of acceptance over the years?
I think I'm thinking of that specific instance when the doctor said, this is okay. And I feel like acceptance is saying, like you said, this is the truth. This is what is, but also that this is okay, that this is what is. Even if we feel like it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Speak more on that. It's almost like there's two levels of acceptance. There's like this part where it's like, okay, this is what is. I think that's a great, simple way of like, this is what is, period.
Right.
But I think that there's this piece where I think, and because you and I share a common faith in Christianity, I think that there's a deeper acceptance of that this is okay. And I think I find that leaning on the bigness of who God is.
Yeah.
And the essentially trust that like, this isn't the whole story. There's also a lot of feelings of like a little mad still about it.
Yeah.
Like, right. So
right.
It doesn't mean it's all like, oh, this is so wonderful. And like, But I also, the word surrender is coming to my mind. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, so what do you think about there's this like twofold part of acceptance where it's like there's this blanket acceptance, but then there's like this deeper acceptance that maybe is tapping into that like spiritual peace that we find in, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it comes down to holding like our grief and the trust and the joy together because, and I can be a little bit specific with this because I think my son would be okay with me sharing this. Like there was just a time because my son has spina bifida and he ended up way worse, way more medically fragile in that aspect of spina bifida than I had ever anticipated or desired or wanted. And we worked so hard for so many years with braces and trying to walk. And that's almost the first question you get with my son's diagnosis is, oh, can your child walk? Or what level are they? You know, do they have braces? Do they have this? Do they walk sometime? Do they have a walker? And it was in that moment when his doctor said, it's okay for him to be a full-time wheelchair user. He will have a better quality of life because he won't be worn out or exhausted and because we're going down this road with these specific medical care we had to go down, it's really not feasible anymore. I think some of the acceptance was grieving that. And I think it kind of went back to like just having peace about what other people thought, that we hadn't just given up, that we hadn't tried, and I hesitate to even say that because I don't think it's giving up. Like I do not like the phrase wheelchair bound. My child is not bound by his wheelchair. His wheelchair allows him to have freedom and life and access to the world in a way that he couldn't have if he did not have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was this acceptance of, you know what? His value and his worth does not come because he can walk. I have to remember that his value and worth comes because he is a child created in the image of God. And we're not settling. This is the reality. This is the truth of what his potential is, his maximum potential. And grieve that and rest and trust that there's a purpose in this. And one day in heaven, he will walk again. And I fully believe that we have that hope. So it's just, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but it's just this tension, really, I think, of what we maybe hoped could be there. So there was this song I came across when I spoke for years at our local children's hospital about family-centered care, what it looked like from the family's perspective. And for many years, I would end my presentation with this song called Shine. It's through Signing Time. And basically, this mom created these amazing videos for her daughter who was deaf, and she also had a daughter with spina bifida. But the song basically says, like, Lucy will do what Lucy will do when Lucy's ready to do it. And, you know, Sally will do what Sally will do when Sally is ready to do it. She's going to shine in her own way, in her own time. And I do truly believe that about our kids, that their trajectory of their path in their journey is going to look so different than even another child with the same diagnosis. And we need to, I feel like if we're just fixing all the time, we're not loving them for where they are, who they are, celebrating. There's those small things, the small ways of healing, the small joys, all of those things. If we're just always so focused on fixing and we're fighting instead of leaning into, okay, this is okay. This is the truth of where they are. And I am not going to fight this anymore.
Yeah, I think that you can see if we're fixated on a certain result that our child produces, how it would make it pretty impossible to genuinely embrace and cherish where they are today and even the small milestones. So I think that's a great aspect. And as you said rambling, I thought it was just all your wisdom flowing out. I was kind of synthesizing what you had said earlier, and I was like, oh, what you were speaking to earlier when you talked about acceptance and saying, and it's okay. I think it's that acceptance leads us to peace.
Yeah.
And it's that peace. There's this peace that I have experienced when we let go of all the things, actually, and we recognize whatever it is, it's okay. Or maybe it would be more resonant to say, and I will be okay. I know that certainly in my son's cancer journey, when we've been approaching surgeries and a lot of unknowing of what's going to happen, I had to do some real deep work of acceptance. And that acceptance really, really opened the doors to peace.
Yeah.
So I think that connection was so important. So I'm so glad you were able to kind of help us get there. The other thing that, kind of just summarizing what you shared, is that there's this opportunity for us to show up as moms to help our child reach their full potential. And that is what they can do.
Yeah.
And there's value in this, right? But
Yeah.
that is distinctly separate from the value of who they are. Like these two things are unrelated,
Yeah.
even though are very, I'll say normal. What you see most everybody doing is conflating the two together, like mixing them up. Is that, and guilty of this too. We were raised in a society that is like, you are only as valuable as what you produce.
Yes.
And so untethering that may be, our life's work. I don't know.
Yeah. And I feel like I've been on that journey too. And, when that specific instance happened with that doctor, it was when I started to ask the deeper questions of why? Why do I feel like this is what I need to fix? Why can't I accept it? Well, that deeper why was, again, that brokenness in me, that I can't tolerate things that I don't feel like are whole or perfect or wrapped up in a nice, beautiful package with a bow. Well, why is that? And, that's been some of the deep soul work that I've been on with, my story of origin, and understanding that acceptance doesn't mean that I'm settling.
Yes. And I'm so glad you brought this point up. Tell us more about your experience and kind of how that works for you.
I think it doesn't mean that, again, that deeper question of why, some of it was just pride, honestly, that I didn't want the world to judge my child or to judge me. Again, that guilt, like I haven't done enough to get him to walk. I haven't done enough. We've settled. And the fact is, we didn't settle. We were accepting what is and choosing not, I was thinking about this, like, how do you know when to stop pushing your child? And I think when they're fighting you constantly and everything is a fight and there's no peace, that word you said, there's no peace, it's time to say, this is okay, and to move on. And here's the thing, it doesn't mean that there's not a possibility that later on this might not be able to be picked back up again. In some cases, right? We walked away from, occupational therapy years ago because there just wasn't peace. And it wasn't because I was saying, oh, there's not more work to be done in this place. It's, he's not just a problem to fix. He's a soul to be nurtured. And it's not just about his physical and mental. It's about his spiritual. It's about his whole self. And how am I caring for him in that way? Or am I just trying to get him better so I look better as a mom, or so he doesn't get judged in society? Well, that's not a reason to keep doing things. And I think that's where it's not settling. You're saying, you know what, I'm at peace with this. It doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't even matter what I believe, falsely believe sometimes about myself or my child. It's that I'm going to rest and have peace in this because this is what's true. This is what is right now. And it's time to move on and maybe just focus on what is and be okay, be rejoicing in what is currently right now. We don't always have to be, like you said, producing more, striving more, fixing more. We can settle in the moment and rest in what is right now.
Yeah. And I think a question that I think could be helpful for all of us to ask ourselves in those moments where we're wondering if we should keep going or if we should surrender is, what if it's okay for me to let this go?
Yeah.
And I like that phrasing of the beginning. What if it's okay? It's almost like an invitation to consider the possibility of the okayness, and kind of meets us in that gentleness that I think is a great way to approach this with ourselves. And another, I think, important aspect to say here is that the practitioners that are helping with our children may have very different perspectives. That the OT might have been an expert in their fields and really had an opinion on how frequent and what should be done. I'm thinking back to early days where the school wanted to have PE services, adaptive PE services, and have a IEP goal so Levi could jump. That would be the goal. And this is after years of physical therapy. And I just had to say, no, we're going to let that one go. And, the PT was well intended, right? They're looking through the lens of physical therapy. And, but I'm looking at through the whole experience that this child is having and recognizing that, one, we may have already achieved what we were going to be able to achieve, jumping or not jumping. And also the value of jumping versus not jumping at this point may not have been a critical one for us to master.
Yeah.
So I think that acknowledging that we will be the experts in knowing our children, whereas we get to lean on the expertise of the different professionals to then essentially make the decisions we do for our children.
Yeah.
So there's a myth about acceptance that we've talked about a little bit, but I want to really highlight it too. And that I think a big fear in acceptance is that we'll become apathetic and won't advocate or fight for our children. So a lot of people resist accepting because they think then they will say, well, it's okay. And they're like, but it's not okay. And so the fear is that if I say it's okay, then I won't do anything about it. And maybe it's something that does feel really important. Talking is a great one, right? I think talking or speaking, verbally, I think is one that a lot of time and energy is put into, and the impacts of not being able to be verbal in the ways that a lot of people can be verbal it's very impactful. And so I think that accepting doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, all right, hands off the steering wheel, I won't do anything. It
Right.
actually just means that we might approach it differently. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess what I would just say is it doesn't have to be an either or,
Nice.
right? We can live in the both and find the way to, have some middle ground there. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it being both and.
Well, all of you cannot see my home office here, but I do have a little ampersand, a little sign, a little like that's the AM symbol, because it's like me and my coach colleagues' big joke. It's like, it's always about the both and. So yes, I'm a big fan of always kind of shifting towards that and versus either or. And now let's turn to focus a little bit on what we've talked about a little bit, but I want to give it any more space if we have anything to add on the relationship between acceptance and grief. And I guess even just initially, when you think about when you accept something, the grief you experience, what comes to your mind?
Oh, just how I think in order to accept, I think you have to grieve. I don't know if we can get through to acceptance without grief and lament and stating, personally with my faith, crying out to the Lord of, this is not what I wanted. This is, and in that tension of that, I don't think this is a one and done thing. We're always coming back to the grief. We're always coming back to, but this is the reality of my situation, and I don't necessarily like it. I'm I'm going to accept it, because I feel like when we don't accept it, we're fighting it. And in fighting, there's not peace, there's bitterness, there's anger. And I think when we lean towards acceptance, it doesn't mean that we're saying, yes, I wanted this, right? It's saying, yes, but like, I am going to accept this, but I'm still going to say, you know what? This is hard. This is sad. This makes me have sorrow. I am going to cry out to you, Lord, in this. But at the end of the day, I'm going to choose to trust, and I'm going to choose peace. And sometimes I think we have to do that on a daily basis, depending on how we're confronted with fixing versus, in this journey, because sometimes we are confronted with this on a daily basis, decisions about fixing.
Okay, so as you're talking, I'm picturing this, and I love how you were like, I don't actually think we can accept before we grieve. But then there's this back and forth, and it's almost like, so I'm picturing this, like, I don't know, like reuse, recycle, like circle of like, it's going back and forth, or maybe round and round. And there's this constant dance with accepting and reaccepting and grieving. Because I think another myth is that I think you highlighted is that when we accept something, actually, then the impact is then we have to grieve it. And a lot of times it's like, I am so sad. I am so sad when I accept that this is what is, then all that's left for me to do is to feel the impact, to feel the loss, to grieve what I long for, or what my son longs for. And so I think this picture, I want everyone to picture like this, like, circle. Maybe the arrows are even going back and forth, but there's like on this circle, it's like acceptance and grief and sadness and anger and joy and sorrow and delight and, surrender and celebration. It's like all in there.
Mm-hmm.
we're tumbling around.
Yeah. The journey's never linear, I don't think.
No.
Ever.
Well, and then you're describing, kind of your orientation, your story of origin. And I very much relate to the experience as you're sharing. It's like, we talk about control, things not looking perfect. And it's like the desire for the lineal aspect of like, I do this and that turns out just like I want it. And then I have this. And then at the end, the equation is whatever wonderful thing I want. And so I think there's this tension, you've used that word, it's like of wanting this like neatness. And then actually it was an image that a therapist I'd worked with briefly many years ago. She described the non-lineal experience. And like, basically it's like a ball of yarn, like it's like a zigzag, like not even a neat circle like I'm describing. It's like way messier than that. So I think very well articulated there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the last aspect here, I want to talk about showing up as mothers to help children reach their full potential. Let's hear about when you think about helping your child reach their full potential. What comes to your mind?
So I can specifically think of just a couple things throughout, our journey that we did spend, I think, 9 years or so in speech therapy, feeding therapy, to get my son to eat and to get my son to talk. But I think deep down, I feel like God gives moms these gut mom instincts. And I just had this feeling, and there were little signs along the way, being able to suck on a pacifier and not get aspiration pneumonia, just different things where I thought, you know what? I think this is something that he can do. Now, again, it's not going to happen in a year, 2 years. It didn't even take 5 years. It took 9 years. And it was a lot of stop starts. It was a lot of trying different things. It was a lot of switching therapists or taking a break. Or again, like the process wasn't linear. And it's kind of like, if you think about, working out, right? You have a maximum potential. You don't want to put too much stress on your body to where you're hurting yourself. You have injuries, but you want to put just enough tension that you are exercising the muscles to give them their maximum potential. And I think that same thing is what we can do as moms with our kids, where yes, some of the tension hurts a little bit, right? I can remember the tears when we would try to feed him baby food and he would just cry and it would break my mama heart. But I knew it was safe. We had doctors that told us it was safe. And he made progress slowly. And so I think you have to think about your goals. Like I know you said that earlier. Like what is the goal? Is this all about me fixing my kid? Or is the goal about helping them reach their full potential? And then we have to just, I think, ask God for wisdom. Ask for wisdom to know what is that balance of we're pushing too hard and we're running a full marathon day one out of the gate, or there's enough tension, there's enough just slight, push to help them reach their full potential. And then I think there's grieving in that too, because it's definitely probably not going to happen on the timeline that we think it's going to happen. And so we just have to be willing to allow them to move at their own pace in their own time and realize that by the age of 18, they're not done yet. They're not done yet. We're not done yet. I'm edging up towards 50. I'm not done yet either. So
it's a great point in really recognizing there's not a doneness that we achieve. But back to the working out analogy, I think that's a really great one, because if we think about our own selves and what it takes to kind of be in the pursuit of our own potential as it relates to health, it takes some commitment, it takes some urging, it maybe takes some accountability. And I think to do it in a way where we don't injure ourselves, especially as we're aging, it takes receptiveness to maybe now is not the day to go do a major CrossFit workout. Maybe today's the day to walk. Or maybe today is the day to actually not do anything in service of your whole health potential.
Right.
And so I think there's this what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe it's there's this attending to what is and being very observant. And it's that equal parts commitment and grace paired together. So potential. When I was thinking about this potential, I think it brings up a couple things for me. Firstly, I think it brings up a lot of vulnerability. So Levi has a very, very, very clear articulated voice. He's able to talk amazingly. He's what would be considered intellectually typical, kind of, with a few caveats, knowing that we have a lot of big brain impacts. But he can do algebra, let's put it that way, which in some ways orients people to put them on a trajectory of, college and what's next and this and that. But it's also paired with what I will describe, and I've talked about on the podcast, is a very compromised judgment, impaired judgment. And so the two together are for me very hard to navigate, because he has desires and doesn't necessarily take the whole picture that I see into perspective. So when I think about him reaching his full potential, I think about him wanting his desire to be fulfilled and my desire to protect him. And I think that there's this push-pull tension of I think that my desire to protect him, and if I'm really going to say the whole picture, and my desire to protect myself, both in terms of vulnerability, but also just my energy of what it takes to be the person to support him in the things that he wants to do. I think it just, I'm just kind of I don't want to do it tomorrow.
Yes.
Or I don't know, it's a little intimidating. This is the word. And I think because the life season we're in, we're in those conversations on the daily.
Yeah.
But if I pull back and say, okay, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know the who's and the how's, but I do know that I'm okay, if I think about his full potential, it's what I want for him, what I think is his full potential is to be fulfilled. It's to say, I am fulfilled in my life, and to find places of belonging, to identify, for him to self-identify as a valued member of society. I think those are the things that I'm okay, I'm a yes to all those things. And so I think then it's stepping into the vulnerable steps of what it looks like to create that. And I think goes back to like what you talked about is then enters in more grief because it's not always going to go how we want it to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm definitely going to be taking little baby steps and seeking wisdom along the way from all the moms that have gone before me.
Yeah, I know. I can just speak into the space a little bit. For me, it's been about releasing control because it's such a, like you said, and when you said about protecting yourself, I think there's a measure of, at least for me, protecting myself from more grief. Like if we try this and it's not successful, am I going to be faced with, well, he didn't reach the maximum potential I thought that he could, and then I'm going to have to grieve that. And so there's this measure of, for me at least, self-protection because I'm a little bit afraid, like just of what this is going to look like. And I'm definitely learning that releasing control is such a huge piece of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think for me, it's potentially grieving what I want for him, but also I think because he's articulating so much of what he wants, I think even engaging in that conversation is, you said the words earlier, you said, I can't tolerate. And I think we come across these feelings as humans, and some of them are almost intolerable for us.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a cat to water, where it's like we just shy away and like skedaddle. And I think as I'm approaching this part of our life, I feel like, I'm hitting up against a lot of places that feel almost intolerable in how much grief and how much uncertainty there is. And so I think, I'll speak out loud in terms of what that means for me is it will be, okay, this is an area where I will be inviting in more and more support, therapy, experts, advisors, moms like you that have gone before me, to recognize that I really do believe that like we are not intended to do this alone.
Yeah.
So have I made it clear? I do not have this figured out.
Me either.
Oh, yes. Okay. So that is full potential. And it's funny. You mentioned it's like, well, this is the game I think we're all after in terms of like reaching our own full potential of being full of who we are and experiencing the fullness of joy alongside grief. And I think, it's like maybe we just focus on this for ourselves before we go put it all over our children.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just an idea.
Yeah.
Well, Carrie, thank you so much for this conversation.
You are welcome.
And I don't know, as we close out, is there anything else, I don't know, that's on your mind?
I will say there's one book that helped me a lot, and it's called Practicing Affirmation.
Okay.
And it is from a faith-based perspective, but it talks about just affirming God's image in other people. And it has helped me a lot. I read it probably, 7, 8 years ago, and it helped wake me up to that striving and being able to rest and say, it's not my job to fix everybody around me. And how can I affirm and be, and not just our kids with disabilities, but be our family's biggest cheerleaders and encouragers and all of that.
For all people. Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link that in the show notes. We'll make sure we have probably even just an Amazon link so y'all can go find that. So thank you for that recommendation. Yeah, isn't it incredible how we get these little like bits of wisdom and goodness that stick with us. So thank you for mentioning that and sharing that. And again, just thank you for sharing who you are with my podcast community. And I will encourage anybody interested to go check out your podcast, This Unexpected Life. And of course, we'll have any other way to contact you on the show notes.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All right. We'll see you on the next episode.